A tiger tank entered the camp.
I'd never considered myself to be a Tiger guy, but when I saw Takom had announced they were releasing 3 Tiger 1s, I have to admit I was a little excited. I'd built Tigers before, as you'd know if you are a part of this community. However, I'd never built one in my favoured scale of 1/35. I enjoyed every part of the build of the Hetzers that Takom released last year, so if that was any indication of what these new Tigers were going to be like, I figured that was a good opportunity for me to build my first 35th scale Tiger 1. There were a few groans and moans online, as we usually get when Takom released pretty much anything. And I appreciate that some felt some sense of disappointment because the tiger is one of those subjects that's quite overrepresented, or at least well represented in this hobby. But the fact of the matter is this type of model sells, and as a mainstream manufacturer, everyone wants a piece of that action. There are 3 boxings of these Tiger 1s from Takom. There are 2 mid-production versions. One of those mid-production versions is focused on Otto Carius's tank, and the last version is a late production tank, which is the kit that I've been lucky enough to be able to review here for you today. Takom has also pumped the upsell with a 3-boxing limited edition with all 3 versions of the tank included in the box, and it comes with a 16th scale of Otto Carius as a bonus. By now you've probably all seen the images online of the beautifully rendered and moulded parts in these kits. The level of detail and the natural looking organic shapes in the Zimmerit just look absolutely stunning. The kit comes with Lincoln length tracks that look lovely, even though the guide horns come as separate parts. There's also a small amount of etch as well as a metal barrel. The instructions are in the usual Takom style, and the kit I have comes with 4 different schemes, with one of them being a command version of the tank. When I first looked through the instructions, one of the things I noticed was the amount of choices you had to make in terms of choosing a part for your model, but there wasn't a lot of direction as to why you would choose one or the other. The other thing I noticed, and it's a very minor thing, is the typo on the scheme suggesting that the model I had was a mid-production version. But inbox reviews and studio photos can never tell you what a model is truly like. So today, I'm going to take you through the steps and some of the hurdles I faced when building this Takom Tiger 1 late production kit. And I'm also going to try and cover off on some of those optional parts where you have to make a choice and try and help you understand why you would choose one over the other. Now, by no means an expert on the Tiger tank or an expert on any of it, to be honest. So I would encourage you to do your own research, or if it's not important to you, just build it however you want. So without further delay, this was my experience with the Tiger 1. Hope you enjoy. I begin construction with the cooling fans and the radiators, and as a note from the start, I do tend to jump around in the order of build, so I suggest if you're new to the hobby, then follow the instruction sheet rather than following me. I fitted these pieces even though it was highly unlikely they'd be seen on the finished model. It's not long before we get our first glimpse at that beautifully sculpted and moulded Zimmerit pattern as it is attached to the hull section of the model. It's then we get the first choice to make through the build, and there are a few, so hopefully I can fill in a few blanks for you along the way. One of the options has a slightly different configuration where the toe shackle will sit. You may notice one of the shapes has a cutaway, which was implemented in January of 1944 in order to allow the toe shackles to swivel more freely. One of the things I like about the way Takom have tackled this kit is the positioning of the sprue gates to the parts. So as not to damage detail in the part, they have attached them to the underside of the pieces in most cases.
The swing arms have a moulded center line which should be there, so be careful not to remove it thinking it's a seam line. In saying that, the arms will be well hidden behind wheels on the finished model. The underside of the hull appears to have the appropriate details for the late production vehicle. The addition of the HL230 P45 engine, if that means anything to you, meant that a larger rectangular hatch was required for maintenance, plus there was another drain hole added to the earlier configurations of that hull floor. Another tick for the model is the positioning of the external bolts for the shock absorbers. The positioning changed during the production run, and this kit looks to have them in the appropriate position for the late production model. The drive housing and swing arms are attached, and the fit and positioning of the swing arms is tight and precise with no slack or guesswork with their placement. The drive sockets are the next choice you are required to make, with the only difference being the shape of the spokes. I'm unsure as to when you would use one over the other, but what I can see is the star-shaped fixture on the centre of that sprocket face, which was an addition from June of 1944. Two options for the idler now. The largest 700mm diameter idler was replaced with a 600mm one on later models, and that was done in an attempt to reduce mud and debris build-up around that area. The late boxing is a 2-in-1 kit, meaning that you can make the standard late Tiger or you can make a command version of that tank. At step 7, the instructions break into two parts where you'll need to start making some choices as to the version you want to make, but it is unclear as to which one is for which vehicle. After digging a little deeper, it became apparent that the -1 options were the options for the command vehicle, so I'd be following those. The positioning holes for that version were drilled and the various bits and pieces were attached. Because the scheme I'm planning on painting is quite complex, I'm going to leave off some of the tools and cables to help with the application of that scheme. The exhaust pipe was one of those areas that evolved through the life of the Tiger, and the style provided in this kit is appropriate for vehicles manufactured after October of 1943. The telling tale is the version prior to this had a flap over the exhaust outlet, whereas this version does not. Often the heat shields around the exhaust suffered damage and wear in the field. I decided to attach them with blue tack for the time being, as I hadn't decided how I was going to actually display them. I suspect I'll attack these with a rotary tool once it comes time to get serious with the build. The external starter guide plate also evolved during the life of this vehicle, and the version supplied with the kit was the final version of the part and is appropriate for a 1944 vintage vehicle. The rear armour assembly for the hull was then attached in place. Fit was fine, with nothing a little touch of glue and some pressure couldn't address. The command version requires a small hole to be drilled to the side wall, but there is no position marked on that part, so a little guesswork is required at this stage. The side Zimmerit panels can then be applied to the side walls of the hull. In September of 1942, all new Tigers were fitted with a 15-metre long cable to aid in changing the tracks for transportation or repair. The part itself is nicely refined, however it is quite fragile, so take care when removing it. I'll be leaving mine off until the paint scheme is in place. The detail in the bow gun is lovely, and the part even has the hole in the barrel moulded into the section. That assembly is then attached to the frontal arm plate using a ball mount. The piece can then be attached in place. The track guards are supplied in a continuous piece, however this was again a section that often suffered damage and wear in the field. Replacing these with copper sheet or an etch set could be an option, but I decided to split the part into 4 sections per side. By then thinning the plastic using a sharp scalpel, I'm able to slightly bend and manipulate the pieces to simulate light damage, and then I can glue them in place. The mounting brackets on the hull make the positioning quick and easy. The front glacis plate is then attached. The fit is snug with next to no gaps to worry about. Now, we all know the Germans loved to overcomplicate their designs. Why have 8 wheels when you can have 16? So it's time to move on to the wheel assemblies. I like to try and keep my options open when building armour, so the wheels were dry fitted at this stage. I like to be able to remove them to give me access to the model when it comes time for painting and weathering. The wheels have very good detail and gave me no issues to assemble, and there's no doubting the stack wheels do look cool when they're in place. And what tank model wouldn't be complete without the tracks? And this range of Tigers comes with a Lincoln length style of track, with the unfortunate detail of the guide horns being supplied as separate assemblies. It's not all bad news though, because there is a jig to assemble the singular links in blocks of 10. The guide horns are pre-spaced and are reasonably easy to set in place, although it is a little time consuming. I'm using Tamiya extra thin cement and got caught out a little with the glue seeping onto the jig, so be careful not to allow that to happen or you will end up gluing the track links to your jig. The longer tracks are easier to fit the horns because they come in the longer lengths. As long as the horns are straight, they seem to find the locating holes reasonably well. Once the glue is set, the connectors can be clipped off and disposed of. The attachment points are weak though, so it is inevitable you are going to need to reseat a few of those guide horns. The single link pieces are now held together with a touch of the glue. The glue gives me about 20 minutes window of drying time, which will allow me to roll the sections around the drive socket. The socket has been placed into another jig that will allow the links to sit as they should and will give me their correct shape and correct fall. I was toying with the idea of using metal tracks I had in the stash, but pressed on with this assembly in order to give you a thorough review. I'm sharing this because I'm not gluing these tracks to the sockets and the wheels with the vision I'd be substituting them at a later date. It certainly would have made the track assembly a little easier, but I seem to like making things hard for myself. To help the curved sections hold their shape, they were rolled around the idler and the drive socket and were held in place with a little bit of masking tape. Once the distorted assemblies were now dry to the point of being able to hold their shape, I could go back and piece the other lengths together. The quick setting cement is perfect for this job because it grabs fast but still allows an amount of movement in the joints. That means I can feed the tracks around the wheels and glue each joint as I came to it. The guide horns needed a little coercion to find their position between the gaps in the wheels, and they were helped to hold in place by using a few pieces of sponge to keep downward pressure in those positions while the glue was drying. The bottom length can then be pieced in place. I temporarily attached the right hand base track to ensure the model was sitting on an even plane. I then invested 3 hours of my life assembling one length of the metal tracks, but came to the conclusion the kit's supplied tracks looked and sat better than the white metal ones did, so I decided to revisit the other side of the tracks at a later stage.
That was a waste of time.
It was time to seal the belly of the beast, and even though I knew there wasn't going to be much of this to see, I painted the parts that might be seen through the hatches and grills. Ivory was first sprayed to the driver's frontal armour, and after a short time a very basic mask set is set in place and the red-brown primer colour is applied to the rest of the interior. Unnecessary, I'm sure, but the time you don't do it is the time you regret it. The configuration and positions of the elements around the deck of the Tiger was another area that saw developments through the life of the tank, and again Takom seemed to have all of the positions and shapes in the correct locations, at least to my eye. The instructions suggest to fit the engine deck and tools prior to attaching it to the hull, but I felt having it attached to the hull first made more sense, so I glued it in place. Fit was tight and a little off in parts, but I found by carefully working my way around the model and gluing small lengths and working methodically around the shape, I was able to get a pretty good fit. The engine deck and grates can now be attached. The grates for the cooling fans can be posed in the open position should you choose. One of the distinctive things on these Tiger decks is the mesh guards covering the grates to help avoid grenades finding their way into the engine compartments. The kit comes with the grills as etch detail, which first need to be bent using an appropriate bending tool. The folds required are very fine, so trying to do this without a dedicated tool would be pretty tricky. The etch parts are now attached using super glue. When attaching etch to styrene, a CA glue or super glue if you like is generally required, although it is possible to use a touch of PVA glue instead. PVA will give you a greater working window of time than the CA glue will, however the bond will be far weaker than the super glue. I'd mentioned that I wasn't going to attach all of the pieces around the model to aid in the painting phase, and the top deck section was no exception. I attached some of the tools and hatches, but would hold off the tow cables until the paint scheme had been established. Detail in the parts was good, and all of the positionings were consistent with the vehicle produced from June of 1944. I assembled the tow cables at this stage, but will paint and fit them at a later point. The gun breech for the 88 is a really lovely assembly and gave me no trouble for the most part. However, mine had a slight twist that I couldn't quite work out where it was coming from, but it was minimal and would be just about impossible to see on the finished model. Keep an eye out for the mislabeled part number in step 20 also. The choice of optics for the gun sight gives you the option for a single or a double barrel sight, and whilst some of the late Tigers had the two vision holes, the monocular sight was the final version of this production line. You really need to know what tank you want to build in order to make the most informed choice with some of these options. Obviously, you need to ensure you are using the appropriate mantlet at this stage also. The version I'm building has a plug over the machine gun barrel. It doesn't fill the hole but sits proud over the position, and I assume this is correct, although it looks a little awkward. The coaxial machine gun has a great deal of detail but will be near impossible to see, but still makes for an impressive assembly once fitted with the main gun to the mantlet section. The turret has basic details for a loader and the commander's seat, but nothing on the walls. But again, vision will be limited, but a lack of detail will provide some modelers with the opportunity to add some extra bling to their own interior. I could now paint the interior and the gun breech in the ivory colour and then brush paint some of the details using an acrylic paint. I can't help myself and added some light sponge chipping using a black-brown colour and a sponge. Chipping really needs to be subtle to be effective, especially in a location like this. I don't want it to look like hunks of paint are missing. These are tiny superficial nicks that will help give the part some credibility. A quick pin wash using an enamel wash specifically designed for interiors helps lift some of the details around the assembly. There are a couple of big ejector pin marks in the bottom of the basket that I don't really know how to get rid of, so I made peace with that and moved on. Choice time again with the top of the turret, and the key difference is in May of 1944, the turret was made from 2 welded plates. The turret on the left that you see was made from 1. You can also notice the 3 sockets on the right example. These were used to fit a crane to service the engine and rear deck sections. A great detail. You get the choice of ventilator, with or without the armoured cover. Time to fit the cupola, but first I need to mask the clear sections of the periscopes with tiny pieces of masking tape. They can then be fit in the assembly, painted and removed. The fit of the turret roof was a lot like the deck on the hull in that it was good, but made even better by carefully working in small sections and gluing as I moved around the part. The stowage bin is now attached. This boxing has the option of showing a folded tarp in one of the bins, so I just held the hatch in place with a small piece of blue tack to give me the option to display it or not on the finished model. The late version had additional armour around the turret in the form of spare track links, so the mounting brackets are now attached. The assemblies for the top brackets are a little tricky to locate the positions, but there are a couple of very fine lines in the moulding to help locate them and show you where they should sit. Like the track horns, these sections are pre-spaced on the sprue, which makes for a kinder assembly. I'm not attaching the spare tracks at this point due to the painting I have planned, but I did attach the handles for the brackets of these assemblies. I'm hoping the spare links will just clip into these positions after the painting has been done. And last choice, I promise you have 2 muzzle brakes to choose from. The larger is the standard Tiger muzzle brake, however the smaller one is the style used on the Tiger 2. It did however find its way onto some Tiger ones that were produced after April of 1944. The command version has a number of additional aerial mounts which I fit, however I chose not to attach these aerials yet as I don't want to knock them off during the painting phase. Each of these boxings comes with unique storage or a figure, and whilst it's a bit gimmicky, it did suck me in. The organic shapes and options are definitely interesting, and I'm not sure if I'll use them on the model, but I knocked them together to give you a feel of what they look like. So did we need another Tiger? Probably not, but are these Takom Tigers good? Well, the answer is absolutely. I loved the build from start to finish. Maybe not the track so much, but this is a seriously cracking kit, and I can't wait to sink my teeth into the paintwork for you in a few weeks' time. The kit has an attention to detail that a lot of manufacturers don't seem to hit. The beautifully rendered parts are testament to how far the sculpting and manufacturing process has come. The build experience and fit were just about flawless, and while the tracks were not that enjoyable, that is just part of the journey of building armour. They do look great on the finished model, and even down to the details of the casting numbers moulded into the individual links. Just take care with the guide horns because they can be easy to knock off. There are many choices and options in this release, which of course is fantastic, but the downside of that is you don't get much guidance as to how or when you should use them. You really need to understand the intricacies of the Tiger you are wanting to build if getting those details right is important to you. These Takom Tigers represent excellent value for money, and if pre-sales are anything to go by, people seem to be responding in droves. If a Tiger is on your radar, then I'd suggest you take a good look at this one because it is an absolute beauty. If I've added some value today, please hit the like button and be sure to subscribe. And I love hearing and responding to your comments below, so keep them coming and let's build this community together. Remember guys, this is the greatest hobby in the world. Share it with your family, share it with your friends, and let's be proud of what we do. Until next time, I'll see you soon.
Tiger tank?
Was that a Tiger tank?
Hey, that's beautiful. My compliments to the General Staff, sir.